check it out later is able to. So I'm Kelly Goodman Schaefer, President and CEO of the Bedford County Chamber of Commerce. I think I know most of you that are on this call, but we're very pleased today to have Representative Carl Metzgar from the 69th District of Pennsylvania here to talk to us a little bit about how things are going in Harrisburg and what all we can expect in the coming months and weeks in relation to the coronavirus. So Carl, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.
Sure. We want to start out with a little bit of a status update of what you're up to and what's going on in Harrisburg right now.
Yeah, of course, just like everyone's life, the coronavirus pandemic has dominated our workload. And I in the years that I've been in office, I've never seen this much volume just through our offices of people trying to get help. And I think that's largely related to a great deal of confusion coming from the governor's office, and then those of us in the legislature, whether it's my office, Jesse's, or Wayne's, being the only place that will answer the phone at the state level. The governor's office, they let it go to voicemail and let us try and deal with all the problems that were created. So I mean, we've really been overrun with that. And then of course, then there was the legislative battle that was in place between ourselves and the governor's office, trying to work with the governor to remove some of his more onerous limitations and try and get people back to work. And then of course his veto of those, but then subsequent almost the very next day allowing the exact same thing that we had voted to do go into place. And so we pushed him, and that was quite the battle. And now we have the sort of a constitutional crisis over the repeal or the termination of the emergency declaration itself that's now playing out in the Supreme Court. So, that's sort of a 20,000 foot view of what's happened the past 3 months from our standpoint. I think the one thing that I can say, with regard to the pandemic in my district, and I think this is, pretty well across most of rural Pennsylvania, is look, we were all on board with being safe and making sure that our hospitals weren't overrun. I think that was everyone was on board with that. We all sat at home for 3 weeks to make sure that happened. But then whenever that didn't happen, where the hospitals weren't overrun, and as a matter of fact, one of my buddies runs a hospital up in Pittsburgh, and he told me that it was one of the most boring times of his life. He said they only had 1/3 of the patient load that they normally had, and he was really anxious to get back to work. So once that happened, I think the governor needed to shift gears, and he simply didn't. And that's where I sort of stood from a procedural standpoint. I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be one, but at the same time, I think common sense would dictate that it was time to go back to work, and that's why the legislature acted the way that we have. So that probably is my best synopsis of what brings us to where we're at today.
So thinking of the projections that we're hearing about maybe a resurgence of the virus in the fall, things like that, do you think it will be handled differently by the state, by the governor's office, and will the legislature be more involved perhaps in making some of those decisions if this were to happen again?
No, I don't think so. I think the governor is, definitely he's going to try and ignore the legislature again. I look, the legislature is a lawmaking body that is made up of representatives of the people. The governor is a sole, oligarch or a king or emperor or whatever you want to be whenever he's acting in this manner. So, I mean, I think that, he's going to continue to ignore the legislature. I think that there very well is going to be a resurgence as we all start to go out and interact again. And, I also point out the fact that, the more testing that we do, the more we're going to have confirmed cases. It's the survivability of that, which is, I think, the most important thing. So from my standpoint, I think you're going to see an increase in cases because we're interacting and we're doing more testing. That in and of itself is not bad because, I mean, every physician that I've talked to says they can't really explain how herd immunity works, but they say that it does in fact work. And the way to do that is to get a slow interaction. There's no way to contain this at this point. It stopped being contained whenever it got out of China. So, I mean, our containment was long gone. We were only trying to get a soft landing for the medical field. And that's where where we're at, what we achieved, and where we're going to go from now. And so I really think that, especially from your business owner standpoint, which obviously this being chamber call, from a business owner standpoint, I think people are done. Like, I don't think if he declares another one, state of emergency in the fall, I don't think people are going to listen. I'm not saying that's a right or wrong thing to do. I just think that's where everyone's at. We've had more businesses close, announcements yesterday, and that's devastating in of itself. And I had a constituent call me yesterday and say that their father didn't get the cancer treatments that he needed in order to get himself to the point where he could have the surgery that he needed, and now that cancer is metastasized into his lungs, and the prognosis isn't good. So there are other people that are getting hurt or killed over this issue, whether that's from a mental illness standpoint or not getting the medical care that they needed because of it. I think that the governor wants to ignore that because right now this is about control for him.
One of the things that we have seen from a rural perspective is how important broadband is when everybody has to work from home and you're trying to educate kids from home and telecommute, telework, teleteach. And I know that that's one of the committees that you're on. You're very passionate about that topic. Do you see anything happening for rural areas of Pennsylvania coming out of this in regards to broadband?
Yeah, I think it's crucial. I mean, and I always tell people that you can't rely on, much of the telecom providers want to rely in the rural areas on wireless. A physics lesson, like what is the best material to transmit energy, and that's what that data is and that bandwidth is. And so air is not the best medium. You want something that's better. We have a copper network that works to do that, and everybody wants to ignore that, but the actual technology is just fine, and copper is a better medium than air. Fiber is not necessary to get broadband, but we do need to make sure that the investment is there for that, and recognizing that. Last week, or I guess it was June 10th, I think, we passed 2 bills, one of which was an investment in $5 million every year, a recurring investment in rural broadband. That was, I believe, House Bill 2348. This will get dyslexic here in a minute, but 2348 actually invests $5 million per year in rural broadband. Which money isn't always the solution, but I think it is necessary. And then the second one is 2438, which is a bill that allowed the rural electric cooperatives to proliferate broadband on their existing right-of-ways, which they are not allowed to do at this point. So those are 2 really good solutions for rural counties like Bedford to do that. So I mean, legislatures responded that way. Those bills are now in the Senate, and I think that they'll. I think there's a lot of support behind them to try and move them quickly and get that off the ground, because we realize this could happen again. There is some precedent, and just frankly, it needs to happen anyway. I mean, the days of not having internet is not an option. Kids that are trying to learn from home, we're all trying to work from home, and just even something as simple as streaming television now has become a thing that we really do need, and that's how people are getting their information. So ignoring this, I don't think is a good solution.
I know another topic that's very near and dear to your heart is agriculture, and obviously there are a lot of farmers that are hurting right now. The Bedford County Farm Bureau is one of the partners with us on all of our government affairs programming. They're doing a milk giveaway this Saturday and Friday, but it's tough to go into grocery stores and see empty shelves where there used to be gallons of milk, and they're in the ground beef section that doesn't have a lot, and what is there is very expensive. So can you talk a little bit about what you think is the future for agriculture in Pennsylvania coming out of COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a supply chain problem. We didn't have necessarily a demand problem, but the supply chain wasn't really able to respond to a change in demand. The restaurants, of course, closed down, which then shifted some of the packaging, and that caused a problem. We actually started an initiative. A pastor in Somerset County and I started an initiative to move milk for $1 a gallon. 2 of the dairies in our area that collect from our local farmers that were getting ready to one of them was telling farmers to dump milk, the other one was getting ready to. We were able to purchase that milk for nonprofit purposes, meaning food banks. And we were able to purchase it for $1 per gallon, or per jug, I should say. I think some of them were half gallons, but we were able to, in 1 week's time, the one dairy that had the week before had them dump 8 truckloads of milk. And that's dairy farmers that just, they're not going to ship that milk. 8 of them were dumped the week before. The first week that we got it started, they dumped 2 truckloads. And then the following week, they haven't dumped any since, to my knowledge. So that was just one dairy. The other dairy wasn't dumping yet, but we were able to move a lot of milk out of there as well. That really helped. That was just something we did on the side during all this, whenever it was going on. It was something I was pretty proud of, that we were able to stop the hemorrhaging there for our dairy farmers. But I think on the beef side, I think Tyson, the company, they put an ad in a lot of the major papers to try and tell people that they were going to shut down, and I think create a little bit of a panic. But at the end of the day, there were only so many hooks for the meat to go to, which then caused the worst scenario, where the farmer was getting the lowest price because they were unable to have a hook for the meat to go, and the stores actually weren't getting it, and the consumer was getting charged more than usual. So the consumers were taking a hit on the chin by getting double and triple charged for the meat, and then the farmer was taking a hit because there was no place for the actual beef to go. And this is for the hog side. The hogs and chickens, that's a very short window to do that processing. So in that case, we had the animals were just euthanized and wasted, and that money is just gone. The beef side, you can hold them a little bit longer, and you just lose money on a daily basis, but on the entire animal. So that was real bad. But the lesson I think we can learn from it, and the way I think we should move forward, is that we need to control our own supply chain. And that means that we've got to take some of the onerous regulation off of the little guy, the one that's the small processing facility that's doing 20 animals a week, or 30 animals a week. We need to make it so that it's not so onerous that they're out of business, and then that spreads the supply chain out and allows us to be more flexible, and protects the farmer and protects the consumer. But in the 90s, they regulated most of those guys out of business, and that was very, very bad, very dangerous. I think we need to take that and run with it, and not forget the crisis. We need to remember the panic and keep that going. So my goal is to deregulate a lot of that. We're still going to keep the consumer safe, but I think it's just gone too far.
I wanted to talk a little bit about small businesses and how, there really seem to be, through the waiver process, some winners, big winners and big losers in the waiver process, obviously. And I know that there's an audit underway with the Auditor General about that. But what advice would you give to small businesses going forward who are trying to come out of this, and they have a lot of guidelines that they need to follow, according to the state and Department of Health and CDC. But what would your recommendation to small businesses be going forward? How should they handle this whole situation from your perspective?
Well, you're right, and I'll use a word that maybe you're too kind to use, but the waiver process was simply corrupt. That's the answer to that question. It was corrupt. It was it did pick winners and losers, and it created a police state for businesses, which is just insane. Like, that's not America. And I think it's one of those things. Over the years in the General Assembly, I've always been one that is against licensing. Like, I'm generally against licensing, and they think, well, the industry wants it, Carl. That's why you should vote for it. And I say, well, sometimes the industry insiders that are making these calls for the quote industry aren't necessarily speaking for everyone in the industry. And now I think people can see sort of why. If you're licensed with the Commonwealth, then your license is now in jeopardy whenever someone is trying to run the state in a way that maybe is not the right way to do it, like the governor did. So I think pushing back on that licensing call all the time is something that I've always been doing, but I think we all need to probably try and make sure that we redouble our efforts to do that, because if they license you, they can control you. And so You know, that's part of government overreach that I think has just gone too far in a way that I'm not comfortable with. But, you know, moving forward, I mean, I think that, you know, nothing's going to come from the audit that's occurring right now. I mean, it literally, the auditor is on the same team as the governor, so I don't think that anything's going to come of that. I think the only way that we get through that is subpoenas, and of course, we did, you know, the Senate subpoenaed those records. The governor came out and offered the list to the public after revoking them the night before. So he went through it, in case anybody that's on the call doesn't know, he picked and chose certain waivers that he felt were completely egregious, I'm guessing, and revoked those the night before, and then gave a list of the existing waivers that were in place. And that, to me, is just it reeks of corruption or mistakes. I mean, literally, I think that there was a combination of ignorance and malice whenever it came to those decisions. I mean, you know, some of the people that were making those calls were clearly people that didn't know anything about business. I mean, if you're saying we want to have steel plants continue to operate but no coal mining, that doesn't make any sense. If you want the pulp mills to run, make paper, but you don't want timber, that makes no sense. I mean, they don't know how a supply chain works. And you know, I've always I made the joke on a number of your you know, chamber breakfasts that, you know, a lot of the people in government that I work with in Harrisburg, if they got a flat tire on the turnpike, they'd be out of luck because they don't know how to do real things in real life. They only know government, and that kind of niche dwelling is dangerous to have people making those decisions for us. And I think we saw that. I mean, you saw a bunch of you know, people that didn't work making decisions about people who do work.
In the early days of this crisis, it seemed like there was going to be some attention to like cutting through some of the red tape, the processes, the permitting, things like that, to try to keep business, you know, going and hopefully get business restarted. Do you see a reduction in red tape in any aspect right now?
No, not at all. And I think that the governor's still using it as a tool. I mean, he's suing the Carlisle events grounds now to try and stop them from, I mean, clearly they're not letting go of the power. They want more. They're using it to grab more power. So, I mean, from my standpoint, I'm all for rolling it back. But, you know, I think we have an administration that's very much opposed to that.
So that brings us to the future in terms of the budget. So I think you guys passed a 90-day budget. You have to renegotiate a budget starting in October, because from November to the end of the year, there's really nothing that's going to happen because there's an election and then lame duck, right? So how do you see that budget conversation, battle, whatever you want to call it, going?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, the problem that we have is right now we're $4 or $5 billion behind in revenue, depending on who you ask. Now, the theory behind that budget was, you know, perhaps there will be that V rebound that they keep talking about. Maybe that'll happen. I think probably the only saving grace might be more money from the federal government. But again, we're all going to pay that price in the form of inflation. So I don't think that's a real solution, but it might be the solution. But, you know, I do think that there is you know, I think there's a giant gaping hole there. And you know, for me, I'm willing to say, okay, let's take a good hard look at, you know, some avenues in government that are maybe overgrown and make some cuts that, you know, certainly we can live with, give everything a haircut. And then there's some programs out there that I think genuinely can be cut. I still think, and, you know, I'm always plugging my bill, but I still think that my drug testing for welfare program would ensure that the right people are getting the right help and that those who don't need it aren't, and that we can get them some drug treatment instead of just giving them more money for drugs. And so I think those things could be cost savers. You know, I do think that there's ways to do that, but you know, right now there is a gaping hole in our budget. We're gonna have to start looking at that very hard. October, we're looking at it now, I mean, to be honest, but the decision's gonna have to be made in the event that there isn't a rebound. You know, are we cutting our way out of it? Are we going to try and borrow our way out of it? Or are we going to tax increase our way out of it? I can tell you that 2 of the 3 are not palatable for me. But you know, there's obviously 253 members of the General Assembly that got to go through that, and you have to get a governor that'll sign off on it. So, or override them, but that's very difficult to do.
So how tough of a fight is this going to be, especially considering there's an election coming up in November? Can you guys get it done?
Yeah, I think it'll have to get done. I mean, we'll get there. It's just, you know, how painful will it be in which direction? So, I mean, I encourage, you know, all the people on this call are you know, they're decision makers, they're movers in the community. I would say that, you know, you need to reach out to us and say, what is it that you prefer? Because there's really only three solutions. I mean, maybe a fourth if you think about the federal government sending us money, but I don't think that's going to fix all of our problems. But the only three solutions really are tax increases, you know, cutting spending, or borrowing money. And I think that you know, I'm anxious to hear, you know, as everybody circulates, where is everyone on that? I know where my personal stance is, but you know, I always do my best to try and reflect my district.
I do want to invite our folks on the call. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, you do have the capability of unmuting yourself and to putting your camera on. So if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to put your face on and ask any questions that you might have.
Only easy ones, Kelly.
What's that?
Only easy ones.
Only easy questions. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Any other bills that you're working on right now, Representative Metzgar? As we see.
Yeah, I have a couple bills. I have one that, you know, right now, you know, Pennsylvanians, you know, only 30% of 30% of people participate in shopping for their electricity. I have a bill that right now, whenever you shop or you don't shop, you always just get a bill from the distributor of that electricity. In our case, you know, First Energy. This doesn't have any impact on the RECs. REC is exempt from this, but if you're a First Energy customer, you get a bill from Penelec, and that bill might somewhere on there say who is the supplier of that electricity. To me, that doesn't make any sense. Like, that's like ordering something off of Amazon and then getting a bill from the post office. I have a bill out there that brings that relationship together, that you, whenever you are out there in that market, that you have that direct relationship with that provider, that supplier of electricity. And the reason why that is important is that, you know, it allows you to actually see who you're dealing with, what you're dealing with, and what you're paying, and in a lot more transparent way. And so I think it's going to encourage market competition. You know, we're up against, you know, 20 years of deregulation, and we still only have 30% of the people taking advantage of it. That doesn't necessarily make any sense. And I think that, you know, if we utilize the free market and allow it to work, it's going to lower our electric rates.
Anything else?
Yeah, I have a couple of housekeeping bills that are out there to do some things for our record keep. Trying to get my still my prison reform bills, which I think are crucial right now. You know, there's prison reform bills. You know, I'm trying to put, you know, prison back in prison. I guess that, you know, it's right now we've made it a country club style, where, you know, we have requisitions for big screen TVs for the whole. So it's no longer punishment to be there, and you know, it's endangering our guards. It's endangering the other inmates, frankly, and because there's no order. And so unfortunately, the Secretary of Corrections has no interest in trying to control his own institutions and run them in a way that is safe. And so, you know, I've had to intervene and try and run those bills. I have 2 of them in the Senate now, 4 in the House. And I'm hoping that we can get some traction with them. You know, they've become a little bit of a political hot potato, but I mean, from my standpoint, that's what I'm there to do, is to take on a tougher issue that maybe isn't as popular, but you know, I think it needs to be done. You know, of course, you know, over a year ago, we had a corrections officer killed in Somerset, murdered by an inmate, and you know, we can't tolerate that.
As you're trying to work toward getting these bills pushed through, what is the climate in Harrisburg right now, aside from, you know, the governor's, you know, vetoing things? I'm just curious how sometimes coming out of a crisis, there seems to be more tendency to work together. I'm not sure that that's the case in this crisis in the federal level or the state level, but just can you describe kind of the climate? Is business getting done, and how? Just a couple weeks ago, there was a little dust up over a legislator who had tested positive and not told people. Just curious, how is the virus impacting just day-to-day operations in Harrisburg, and how effective can you all be in moving some of these things forward in this climate?
Yeah, I mean, it's polarized right now. I mean, it maybe even hostile would be a good way to call it. And I mean, look, the pandemic issues have overpowered things that I've been working on, for several months, like the prison reform bills I'm talking about. They've received very little attention because we've been, trying to get people back to work, and of course there is a political play. But I mean, I think if you look at, and probably the biggest elephant in the room is the legislative resolution to terminate the emergency declaration. That received, I think, 21 Democrat votes. So these are bipartisan issues at this point. It's just, there are still deeply entrenched people that are, they want to stand behind the governor. And look, I'm not questioning whether they believe it to be. I'm not saying that it's purely political. I'm just saying that they believe it firmly that they need to stand by the governor, and the governor is doing what's right, and that the legislature isn't an equal branch of government and should do what, just follow in lockstep with what the governor dictates at this point. I don't believe that to be true. I think that the emergency declaration is something that's just that, used in an emergency, and that the moment the legislature is back in the building and can deal with the issues, that order should be terminated, and we should be able to go about the process in the way that the people intended, which is that you tell me what you think and I try and take that to Harrisburg and get it done, and that way you have a voice. Otherwise, just some guy that claims to, some guy that's in New York and won the governor's race gets to run the state without any oversight from any of us. That's not what was ever intended by the Emergency Powers Act.
We have a question from Paul from the Bedford Gazette. Paul, can you hear us? And can you, trying to unmute you, but there you go. Go ahead. Well, trying to unmute him. Hold on. Where did he go? Okay, Paul, can you go ahead with your question? I'm not hearing him. Are you here? Is anybody hearing him?
I don't hear him.
Paul, I'm sorry. We're not hearing you. If you wanted to text me your question or put it in the chat.
I think it is in the chat. You can.
Oh, is it? I'm not seeing it in the chat.
Okay, well, I have it here. I can read the question from Paul.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Paul asks, what is your reaction to the state Supreme Court taking control of the dispute regarding the emergency powers? Is there the remotest chance that the court will decide against Wolf? I do, Carl, the lawyer, I can put my lawyer hat on. He's also a legislator right now. But I would say that we based our behavior and our vote and how we made the resolution on the Danny DeVito case. So there's a Danny DeVito, that's his name. He challenges the governor and the Secretary of Health during the emergency declaration and takes it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, in essence, you're before the wrong people. The legislature has the sole authority to shut the emergency declaration down. So the court, in my mind, really gave us a roadmap and said, hey, the legislature, by the plain reading of the statute, and if you look, there's a guy by the name of Bruce Ledowitz, who is a very liberal constitutional talking head that happens to be, or at least was, a law professor at Duquesne. And he was my law professor at one point. And we've never agreed on a single issue, I don't think, Bruce Ledowitz and I. But Bruce Ledowitz actually says that he believes the plain meaning of the statute says that the court will rule in the favor of the legislature and that we effectively terminated it. Now, what ends up happening after the termination, the governor could declare a new state of emergency tomorrow if he's kicked out of court and they told him that he's effectively shut down. I don't believe the governor, especially when I tell you that, I think 21 Democrats voted with us to terminate that. I don't believe the governor thinks that that is a tenable political position to continue to declare states of emergency. You know, I think if you look around, I know if I look around my district, now it's not the same as Pittsburgh and Philly, they act a little bit differently there. But if you look around my district, you know, people are, I think, done. They're done with this, that, you know, and they're not going to, even if the governor, I think, continues to do it, people are going to stop following the rules. And so whatever rules that he puts out there. So I guess, you know, I think that he's reached that high water mark, and that, you know, I think he realizes that he needs to win that court case. Now, he might prove me wrong, but, you know, declaring new states of emergency. And again, I think this governor has abused the states of emergency. I mean, keep in mind, we have 3 of them going right now, or, well, 2, I argue, because we terminated the one, but we had one that's been renewed, I don't know how many times, for the opioid crisis. We have one for the rioting that's occurred, and we have the one that we just terminated with regards to the pandemic issue. So again, he definitely is using the Emergency Powers Act, misusing it in my mind. And so to answer your question, I do think there's a pretty good chance the court rules for the legislature.
Paul, do you have anything else? You can send it directly to Representative Metzgar, or you can send it to everyone in the chat, however you want to do it. I'm going to unmute everybody right now. So if anybody has another question, you're welcome to ask it. No? Representative Metzgar, anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, I just, you know, I really thank everyone for taking the time. Please reach out to my office. You know, we are back in my Heinemann office every Wednesday now. So, you know, someone is down at Heinemann on the backside of the bank every Wednesday. And, you know, I really appreciate everyone's support and opinion. So if, you know, anyone, you know, again, has any input from me, I really appreciate that, and I take it very seriously. So, you know, thank you, and keep watching the Supreme Court decision. Although I think the resolution gets published in the Pennsylvania Bulletin this weekend, and the PA Bulletin statute has a presumption that what we have done is correct, and so that, I think, does change some things. But, you know, of course, I'm not trying to give everyone legal advice, but I think that there's a lot of support for the legislature has acted. The governor is challenging that in court, but we've passed a law that terminated the order. So from our standpoint, I believe that there's a presumption of viability that we've done that.
Well, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Have a good weekend. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. I do want to mention real quickly that we do have an in-person Government It's Your Business event coming up on July 8th with Senator Toomey. That's going to be at the Bedford County Historical Society's Hall at Kinton's Knob, and that information will be coming out in Friday's newsletter. But if you want to save the date, that'll be our first in-person chamber breakfast back out of the green phase. And again, that is Wednesday, July 8th with Senator Pat Toomey. We've been inviting him for like 9 years, so we're very excited to have him joining us. So I hope you're able to join us on that date. Again, thank you all for being here. If you have any questions or suggestions, you're welcome to shoot them to us, and we can certainly follow up with our legislators as needed. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.